Okay, so hello everybody. So I'm delighted to be here with Geraldine today, and we're going to be talking about consumer product safety and why it's so important, but specifically risk assessment. So before we get into our discussion, I'd just like to ask Geraldine if she can introduce herself.
Hi everyone, so I'm Geraldine Kosh. I'm the director of my own consultancy, Geraldine Kosh Consulting. I've worked in product safety for nearly 16 years now, and I'm super excited to be here with Richard today and talk about my favourite subject.
Thank you, Geraldine. You've stolen my thunder now because I'm also super excited to be here discussing. I think it's fair to say that consumer product safety is very dear to our hearts. So, believe it or not, I've been doing this for 26 years or so now. My background is mainly electrical and electronic devices and product safety around that side of things, but also general consumer product safety. And it's really key for us to ensure safe products. So, with those introductions out the way, let's launch into our discussion, Geraldine. And let's just start off by talking about why product safety is or consumer product safety is so important, and specifically risk assessment and why that's a key part.
Yeah, I think, those that work in product safety, we kind of understand and we get it. And I think there's some really key examples that have happened recently. I know we talk a lot about COVID and there's been a lot of information about it, but that has really highlighted the importance of product safety. Things like masks or sanitizers or the things that you use in daily lives now. They used to be used in medical situations, but now we're using these every day. And are they actually working the way we expect them to? There's so many different available products out there. Which one do you go for? Which one's best? And I think that's highlighted the importance of product safety. I think, how it keeps you safe, really. If the product's not safe and it doesn't work as intended, that's going to be a real issue. So that's one example. And another one I just wanted to talk about, which is a terrible example that happened, is the situation in Lebanon with the storage, I believe, we don't know yet, the storage of chemicals. And as I mentioned, I was talking with Richard earlier that I worked on firework safety and things like explosions, explosives, and explosions that happen. They're not meant to happen if products aren't stored properly or you haven't thought about the safety of the product. That's a really important factor to think about. So these are products we use on our daily basis, perhaps, or maybe not. And it's really important for them to be safe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think they're two really excellent examples. I mean, it was a tragedy what happened with the explosion, but you're absolutely right. It just goes to show that if you don't take the right precautions and do the right risk assessments and do the right evaluation and take the right steps and think about the hazards. But the masks are also very critical for me because, they've just recently been in the headlines where, a significant amount of masks have been quarantined and, because it now appears that they may not meet the requirements, they may not form a tight enough seal around around the face. But if you're talking about something to do with COVID and something that critical, then it's really important that this stuff works and does what it says.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's a challenge that, with product testing in a way, which is great, of course it is, you need to get the product tested, but you need to think about the consistency of the product. So, another example relating to toys is in 2007, the Mattel recall that happened. And I think this is a good example of that, is that, you might get the gold sample tested or the first one off the production run. If you think about that with masks and how many millions you're producing, the same with toys, if you're producing millions and something goes wrong in the manufacturing process or something changes and the people in the manufacturing process don't understand the importance of safety, so they've changed something, maybe they've changed a filter or a fabric in the mask or a paint on a toy, like, for example, with the Mattel situation, that can have dire consequences for the product. And in that example, in 2007, that's now known as the year of the recall because of the significant impact that had on product safety in general and the consequences in the US, that the legislation changed after that. So it's really important, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we see, that's happened on more than one occasion is, people will launch a product and they'll immediately, to get it to market, they'll immediately then think about going into cost reduction to get the build cost down. And, and then, perhaps you've got purchasing people in the background that are then thinking, oh, yeah, I can save some, unit cost on that item without really thinking through what it's going to do to the ramifications. But that could be an additive in a plastic, it could be a change of a component, it could be a change in the build, it could be a lower cost factory. It's endless, really.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why when we talk about, why is product safety important, it's great that the technologists or the quality team or the legal team know about it, but it's also the whole company has to know. If it's not led from the top down, that can have significant consequences as well. So everyone in the organization really needs to understand how important it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, so what's the legal basis for people thinking about consumer product safety and risk assessment? And, I guess that also leads on to things like, clearly protecting consumers that are using these things, but also a brand protection issue as well.
Yeah, this is a good question, and it's one that's quite grey, I think, like risk assessment is. It depends on the product. Some products is very clear in the legislation. You need to do a risk assessment or a safety assessment with cosmetics or toys, for example. But we do have the General Product Safety Directive, and for me, you should have a risk assessment done on your product. Does everybody do that before it goes out? No, they don't. And to be honest, I think some products you probably may not, or depends. If you've been selling it for years, it's a simple product, you know the risks yourself, you know that the legislation or the standards cover all of your hazards adequately, then that's your risk assessment in itself. But you may want to go above that if it's new to you. If you're, I think actually I see so many companies now that are making masks, and they used to make, something else totally different. And I think, hang on a second, but if they've done their risk assessment, if they know what they're doing, if they're making sure they're explaining what the product is or isn't, then that's okay. But fundamentally, if you're in a court situation and you're standing there trying to defend yourself, and they say, "Did you do a risk assessment?" and you said no, you're going to look pretty silly.
Of your safety case and your defense, yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a massive, complex, 5-day assessment. It can just be that you took 10 minutes to have a conversation with Richard at Tough Sud about it, and that's your risk assessment. And that's one important thing, is if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And that's one thing I learned from an expert witness case, and it's so important. I know, having my own business and the admin, and you're like, oh, do I have to do that? But for the benefit of your company, and if something happens 5 years down the line, it's really important you write that down, that thought process.
Well, I agree. Working in a highly regulated industry from a test lab and a certification organization perspective, yeah, I mean it's absolutely drummed into us from from day one. And you're absolutely right. To pick up on your first point, Geraldine, with that is, I guess, complaint data. If you've got product out there for a number of years, complaint data also paints quite a powerful picture.
Yeah, that's really great information to have. And if, for example, you've been selling a product in millions for 10 years and you've never had a complaint, and you do have a good complaint process, that is powerful in itself as well. But I think any complaints you get in, and you have to be careful what country you're in for that. You might have to alert the authorities depending on the severity of it. But it's a really good way of understanding foreseeable use, what consumers are doing with your product. Maybe you never envisaged that they were going to do that. It's really good data to analyze.
Okay. So just thinking forward ahead a little bit then. So who in the supply chain or within organizations should be conducting these risk assessments?
Yeah, it's a tough one because it depends on the organization. Some companies are very lucky and they have a large quality department. When businesses are struggling, unfortunately, they tend to be the ones that go as well, which is tough. So you might be outsourcing those risk assessments. Internally, I think for sure the quality team, if they're doing it, but I also think the commercial teams should have an insight. And I get some people say, oh, you don't want to mess with those, or the designers, you don't want to inhibit their creativity. But there's nothing worse than if they've brought a product in commercially, or they've spent ages designing a product and haven't thought about this safety, because they could have invested a lot of love and time and money on this, and then all of a sudden, it doesn't comply with EN 71, then you can't sell it. So I think there has to be more than just the quality department that are thinking about this and doing these.
Ignorance isn't a defense either, is it? So I remember we had a case where, it's exactly as you just described. We had a case with somebody that had it was a very novelty toaster, but it was absolutely clearly child appealing.
Okay.
And and you can kind of see that the look of horror when you explain this, and they just say, "What? So all this time and effort, and that we've invested in this, and you're telling us that we can't sell it and we can't do anything." Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Yeah, we're often seen, I think, I've said this before, that as the fun police, and the affecting commercial
Sales prevention department.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if you actually have an organization that understands, if you're stopping a consumer returns, that's a massive impact on your business. The amount of money that people spend on that, and that can be a quality or safety issue, that they're returning products. You're improving sales, in my opinion. But yeah, the amount of times, depending on the organization, I used to have a little Nino fun police coming as a joke. But yeah, we're not fun police at all.
Well, if in an organisation, in a good, well-structured organisation, you're right. It should actually work as a complementary activity to strengthen the proposition, not to work against it. In my view, yeah. So we spoke earlier on about two, particularly, high-profile situations: the explosion and the face mask. Do you have any other examples with consumer products where, this has gone horribly wrong for people because they haven't thought about risk assessment?
Wow, I could write a book probably on that. I think there are unfortunately, there is actually a whole book that I've got, and there's a great website, Kids in Danger in the US, that specifically talks about the individual cases of where children have died, mainly from childcare products, really. And there are products that actually do kill people, to be honest. It's a bit indirect, and it's a bit worried about giving this example, but you think about Grenfell, which was an awful example, an awful situation, but that started with a product safety issue. So these things can go catastrophically wrong when they go wrong. And it's like, when you tell people that you work in health and safety, well, people think I work in health and safety. And, that's one thing I've actually wanted to do, is health and safety is so well regulated and product safety isn't. But they are so similar with what they do. So there's a lot that we can learn from health and safety. But
mix the two up.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good processes in health and safety. But when you're, health and safety, coming from an Irish family and construction sites, I was on them all the time. Not that it's always Irish, by the way, just saying that's my experience. But, if you're health and safety, they're like, oh, here comes health and safety, you don't want us to do anything, when it's not actually, because when it goes wrong, and a scaffolding collapses, which has happened, it's very, very severe. And the same with products, and people, the scary thing about products in a way is you've got this belief, especially as a parent or a consumer, that your products are safe. And I'm the technical author on a PAS, a publicly available specification for button or coin batteries. And, they've killed, over 60 children globally. So these small batteries, and it's a horrific thing that it does. You ingest it and it burns internally, and it's just so unpleasant. So I think in those examples, probably a risk assessment wasn't done, or maybe they didn't know, or weren't sure. But there's lots of examples, unfortunately.
I think the button cell situation's a very good example, because I know that just looking around my house recently, actually I found that I had quite a lot. It's what you don't think you do, but when you start looking for them, little remote controls and toys, and even a medical device that I use actually has a button cell. But I think the more worrying thing is actually I was just storing these things, in packets or on their own, where they're accessible. But you're right. It's they can do horrific damage very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess just following on from that point is, so how can people be sure that they've identified, they've done a risk assessment? How do they make sure they've identified or be confident that they've addressed the hazards, all of the hazards?
Yeah, that can be a tough one, especially if you've got a novel product that's brand new. But for me, the most comprehensive way and the best thing to do, and I can't say you'll get 100%, there might be one that springs up and you think, oh my gosh, I didn't think people were going to do that with it. Very rare that happens, because we have so much information online. I say when I do the training, just whack it into YouTube. I was doing an assessment on a dishwasher, and I googled, things that people do with dishwashers and things they do, cooking salmon, like what? But I'm not saying that once you do that and you open your search to just think about all the different things, I'm not saying they're all gonna kill or injure somebody, but at least you're aware, so that then, if you're making dishwashers or the product you're making, you're not going to get a shock if someone calls up and said, by the way, I cooked salmon in my dishwasher and it didn't work properly. And then you can say, well, that's not what it's for. Or
Actually,
you might use the oven. But yeah, or you could put labeling then on the product, or whatever way you want to mitigate it. That's your decision to make, and it's an informed decision. Knowledge is power. And I think if you can do, the first thing I did was join the British Library, most beautiful place, love that place. There are studies done on everything. You can study and get evidence for various things. And products the same, like I mentioned, YouTube or injury data. I'm obsessed with injury data. I'm sure you know that about me, but there's great injury data that's out there. You can search for consumer products, and that tells you what people are doing, and that's important, I think.
so just following on from our discussions, Geraldine, how can we be sure that we've identified all the hazards that come up when we do a risk assessment, and that we've addressed them adequately?
Yeah, I think it depends on how much time you have. One thing I would definitely say is to use Google really quickly, or YouTube. I had to do a risk assessment on a dishwasher once, a dishwasher type item, and I just Googled things that people do with dishwashers. And that's interesting. So they cook salmon, put car parts in there, put baseball caps in there, the stuff that they do. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a hazard, but at least then you know. And if you are a dishwasher manufacturer, or you make the product that you're making, you should know what people are doing with your product, and then you can kind of mitigate if you want to, or at least you're aware. So if you get a call from someone saying their salmon wasn't cooked properly, you won't be so shocked, and you'll just be like, well, you shouldn't cook salmon. Or you might want to put a warning if it's necessary, or take an action by doing something. But for
Not
sure, looking at Google.
salmon.
Yeah. But for sure, Google stuff. And then if you have time, injury data. I think and everyone knows me. I love injury data. There is publicly available injury data that you can look at the injuries that people have had with products, and therefore the hazards, and also the foreseeable use. It's a really good way of looking at foreseeable use of a product too.
That actually brings me nicely on to the next point, which is all about this idea about foreseeable use, foreseeable misuse. I think again they're probably misunderstood and misused terms. But also, how do we go about factoring in people that, consumer products could be used by children, could be used by the elderly, could be used by people with impairments and so on? How do we tackle all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it is an interesting one. And in the training, we can talk about it. I talk about it at length in sessions I do. And there is this concept of reasonable foreseeable use. And I think that's key. It will only get proven in court, to be honest with you, if you want to be 100%. And there is an article that I have, which is used as a good quiz on what you think is reasonable or not, and what it was deemed at in a court situation. But I think it's, you know, if people are doing it on YouTube and there's hundreds of people doing it, I think you could consider that a foreseeable use. You know, things that are a bit extreme, like, you know, using a chainsaw to cut someone's hair, I think that could be considered unreasonable. And that's where you want to kind of use a judgment on information that's available to you, whether it's reasonable or not, and then whether you want to do something about it. You might not want to. Like my brother showed me once using the Hoover to tie up his daughter's hair. You know, is that reasonable, foreseeable use? But it's something that is done. If you actually put that on YouTube, you'll see lots of people doing that.
You know, I've learned a lot in the in our discussion. I now know that I can go and cook salmon in the dishwasher and have that for lunch. More importantly, if anything on my kit car needs cleaning, I know that I can put those parts in the dishwasher. But maybe when my wife's not here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be running a risk assessment, consumer product safety and risk assessment course. So why should people attend that course? And why is it beneficial for them? What are they going to get out of it? Who should attend it?
Yeah, I mean, I love training. I love doing training. I love, you know, presenting training, and I love attending training as well, as long as it's interesting, for sure. But there's so many reasons why this training is a good idea. And I think it could be a confidence thing. So if you don't do risk assessments that much, which, you know, especially a reactive risk assessment under the GPSD methodology is normally when you've got a serious problem and you want to know whether to kind of recall or take action. Hopefully you're not doing that kind of thing every day, or maybe you are, but it's something you might not have much experience doing. So it's just to give you that confidence, because that's what it's about as well, about trusting your gut. And how to get the information to work out them probabilities. So it could be, yeah, as I mentioned, a confidence thing, or reassuring that you actually know and you're doing a good job. I think working in quality or as a technologist can be quite isolating at times, especially if you're the only person in the organisation responsible for that. So just reassuring yourself that what you're doing is a good job, or learning new tricks that you didn't know about before. And the thing I love about training as well, and an open session like we're offering in this example, is the networking opportunity. So there's going to be lots of people with similar interests. Obviously, they're going to be interested in product safety as well, but from different organisations. And you can learn a lot from those discussions, and make new connections as well.
I guess it's a good point, because they'll have, although it's in a different industry perhaps, you know, different product types, they'll have exactly the same challenges that you're facing. So it's good just to have a network that you can lean on. And okay, so really we're talking about giving people, you know, explaining what they have to do, giving them the tools to be able to do that, and a bit of a support network off the back of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds really good. Well, Geraldine, thank you for your time today. It's been great talking to you, and I hope that you can all join us, Geraldine, for the course that we'll be running. I think it will be, you know, fantastic, and we hope to see you there. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.